Well, staying in Kenya, the government has announced an agreement to officially reopen its border points with Somalia in the coming 90 days. The announcement was made by Kenya's Interior Cabinet Secretary and his Somalian counterpart. Now, this comes after high-level consultations in Nairobi and effectively ends a 12-year barricade that began in 2011 over the influx of Al-Shabaab fighters into the country. Somalia did severe diplomatic ties in December 2020 after Nairobi hosted the political leadership of Somaliland, a breakaway region not recognized by the central government in Mogadishu. Relations have since thawed, with the two countries reactivating those diplomatic channels last year. Well, let's now discuss the implications of this recent decision. We are now joined by Professor Karuti Kanyinga, a research professor of development studies at the Institute for Development Studies in Kenya's University of Nairobi. Great to have you with us on the show today, Professor. Now, of course, we can acknowledge the fact that there's some uncertainty around this decision to open the border after 12 years especially. When one weighs the risks versus the reward, what are some of the major benefits to ending that barricade?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, for having me. Let me say that the first benefit, of course, is that you kill the black market, the black economy that has been driving in the region, especially because we know very well that there is a lot of goods that are brought into the country from Somalia, and there is no taxation of those goods, especially because they use what we can call informal routes, where there is very little policing, where there is very little presence of government, people hiding, and therefore what is likely to happen now, this is likely to open trade relations with Somalia, and we are likely to see movement of formal goods and services across the region. We very well know that Somalia, even if it doesn't have a state, is a large market for goods and services for many countries around the regions. Ethiopia is included, Sudan is included, South Sudan is included. But closing the border meant very much that there would be black market where people use informal routes to get into the country, different types of goods. This therefore creates an opportunity for formal trade relations, formal trade ties. The second thing is that we are talking about a region, a border where families are separated, where it's the same community, same clans, the same ethnic groups that live across the border. And what the opening of the border therefore means is that you are creating opportunities for improved relations between the two countries. Some may argue that it creates opportunities for Al-Shabaab to have an open border. Whether you close borders or not, these type of groups will always penetrate using different border points, using different entry points. So the border is not what will open it, what will make Al-Shabaab a menace. They already a challenge to many countries in the region, and therefore it's not a question of opening the border or closing the border that will prevent them from being an issue of concern. The most important thing is to note that actually opening the border creates opportunity for even people themselves to start undermining the potential of Al-Shabaab to strike, because it improves relations between the two countries, and most importantly, creates opportunities for families on both sides to engage in relations without any hindrances that are administrative or even political.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that, Professor, because some say that not just those very real inter- and intra-security challenges emanating from Al-Shabaab are a factor. There's also the smuggling menace, which comes from South Africa, from Somalia, and actually impacts sectors such as sugar as well in Kenya. So give us a sense of how serious those risks are and what your sense are the biggest risks with opening the border.
Let me be frank and be outright that Somalia itself, because of collapse of the government, creates opportunity for illicit goods, illicit capital flow, illicit goods transactions in the region. And therefore opening up the border already undermines illicit flow of goods into the country and creates opportunity for trade relations between the two countries. But of course, the main risk here, one may want to say, is that it creates opportunity now for Somali citizens to start getting goods and services in Kenya for which they don't pay. I know very well that it creates opportunities for many families across the border to bring their children to study in northern part of the country where schools are running, services are running. It is likely to create new pressure for services. Because, of course, knowing very well that we are talking about same community, same families, no one will deny residence to anyone coming across the border who would like to have medical attention, medical care, or even schooling. The communities support one another. So I see potential of pressure on our own social services in the region near the border increasing. That's something we must contend with, and it's something that one may want to highlight, because local communities will not see it as if they are creating opportunities for foreigners. They'll see it as creating opportunities for their own relatives. Remember, there have been intermarriages. Remember, there have been cross-border relations that have been taking place informally. But now that there is formal opening of the border, we expect draining and pressure on our own social services because they are functional. And on the other side, they are not that functional, right. Especially because for over 2 decades, Somalia's capacity of the state to deliver those services has been lacking. Right. But this is also an opportunity for international community to begin asking, what do we do for social services across the other side? The second risk that I see here, and I must admit this is a risk that we need all of us to pay attention to, is the fact that healthcare services on the side of Somalia have not been very functional. We are likely to have some certain diseases rearing up. Imagine polio, for instance. Immunization levels have been quite low on the side of Somalia, and this is something that even the government of Kenya, East African governments need to start paying attention to, especially right. because immunization levels have been low. Protection against certain diseases has not been that effective on the other right. side.
Well,
and
Professor,
this is something that we need to ask.
As we weigh out some of these pros and cons of opening the border, there are still other issues on the table as it relates to the relations between the two countries. For example, we know the two have been locked in a dispute over that 680-kilometer land border, which is potentially, of course, they say oil and gas rich, a potentially oil and gas rich chunk of the Indian Ocean. So has there been any resolve in those areas?
Yeah, I think there hasn't been any resolve, and border lines across the world actually, border lines are highly disputed, especially if there is potential of natural resources like minerals and oil, as you point out, and I don't expect this one to be ironed out without the international community intervene, without the international community saying, let's have international arbitration using whatever available means is there to make both the parties happy with the outcome. But remember very well that across the world, border disputes are highly politicized. Whether we talk about North Korea and South Korea, whether we talk about the old Eastern Germany and the West Germany, border lines are usually highly politicized, and they require a sobriety of governments and international arbitration and common sense, of course, to prevail in most instances before people get into conflict. That's not the only dispute one can talk about in terms of border disputes within this region. There are many. If you look at Nigeria and the neighbors, if you look at different countries, these are disputes. But this is not resolved. But I suspect that it will always take international arbitration to resolve it.
All right. Now, we also have to remember that this is a phased border reopening, and for the free movement of goods to resume, and for the free movement of people as well to resume, we hear the agreement is subject to approval by Ethiopia and also the United Kingdom. So in light of that, how could a full reopening face any roadblocks going forward?
Yeah, I think the two countries, Ethiopia and Great Britain, of course, will be looking at it from a security point of view. And Kenya is looking at it also from a security and economic point of view. And therefore, I think it's likely to bring all the parties to the table for dialogue purposes. And I'm saying this simply because before the borders were closed. The 1990s, early 1990s and the 80s, before the collapse of the government in Somalia, that border region was the most active in terms of economic trade relations between Kenya and Somalia. It was one of the most vibrant border posts that we have ever had. It was not as vibrant as, it was more vibrant than what we have today with the other countries. So we expect Kenya, of course, to listen to Ethiopia, and we expect, of course, Ethiopia and Britain to listen to Kenya's own arguments, because Kenya has really faced the brunt of this conflict of Al-Shabaab and poor relations with Somalia, more than Britain and more than even Ethiopia. So one would expect that Ethiopia and Britain will listen to Kenya very attentively to see why Kenya is going into this route. And Kenya will say, we have suffered economic consequences, political consequences, and security consequences that warrant us to open the border, and with a view to improving relations between the two countries, and most importantly, improving relations between the communities on both sides.
All right. Well, we do have to leave it there, Professor, but thank you so much for those great insights. That, of course, is Professor Karuti Kanyinga. He is a research professor at the University of Nairobi.